Okay, I'd like to say thank you everybody for coming tonight. It's good to see some friendly faces out there. So we've got a list of questions that I would like to propose to our potential candidates. So these are ones that have come from the audience tonight and some that were sent in earlier. So we'll start off at the first one. Do you think that pro-vaxxers should be concerned about IMOP? Allona? You stand up. Let's go.
My response when I speak to people that choose to vaccinate is you actually should support me, because what I'm going to do for you by questioning the safety and effectiveness of vaccination is give you better, safer vaccines at the very least. And what I'm going to do for you is give you the choice. If more vaccines are added to the schedule, because it looks like it's a never-ending growing schedule, well, I'm going to let you have the choice in the future if you think that there are too many. So it's about freedom of choice. So I actually say to people to support me because I'm actually going to support you with your quest for better, safer vaccines.
Have we swapped mild childhood infectious disease for long-term chronic illness caused by vaccines, including autoimmune disorders that are on the rise? Judy?
Yes, I would have to say the answer to that is yes. We know that from the 1950s right up to the 1980s, very few vaccines were used, and there was no measles vaccine right up until 1970. And vaccines have always been a choice. So yes, in 1990, that's when the schedule started to expand and more vaccines were put on the schedule with coercive measures during the 90s. Doctors were being paid to vaccinate, and the adverts on TV again were making parents feel responsible that it was their duty to vaccinate to protect the vulnerable in the population, which is still the message that we're getting today. So this has all been done without a proper assessment, a safety or efficacy assessment of each individual vaccine. And if you ask for a risk assessment on these vaccines, you won't receive one. The risk assessment is the cost effectiveness of vaccines is done by mathematical modelling, and it's not a transparent system. So yes, the correlation is there, but the government will continue to say to you, correlation is not causation. But I say to the government, science requires that a correlation is investigated before you tell a population that those vaccines are safe. And that is not science. It is a clear indication that it's not been based on science. And yes, we have seen a direct dose-response relationship. We are seeing that we never used to have childhood cancers. Rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes 1 in children is skyrocketing, as is liver disease. And these things need to be investigated. Autoimmune diseases are listed as adverse events on the package inserts and have been for decades. This is not, the pharmaceutical companies have known of these side effects, but they're not presented to the public. So the doctors are breaching their Hippocratic oath. They're not able to now put the public's interest first because they are required to support the government's policy on vaccines. They are supporting the state over the public's interest in this policy, health. So yes, autoimmune diseases, including multiple sclerosis, lupus, Parkinson's, all of these things, they're delayed. The reactions come out years after the vaccine has been given. Diabetes 1 and rheumatoid arthritis, they're autoimmune diseases as well. We don't have any monitoring system that will pick up delayed reactions to vaccines. This could be done if the government had set up a system whereby every vaccinated person, their health was recorded for a period of 5 years. That can be done. We're collecting the vaccination status of every child in this country. Yet in 60 years, the government has only ever relied upon a voluntary reporting system. And with a TGA whose duty it is to monitor safety in the population, It's 100% funded by industry. That's the pharmaceutical companies who profit from the very vaccines that they are required to approve in their role as the TGA. Right, so, and in fact, the TGA is also, they are able to decide, even when you report an adverse event to a vaccine, they're able to decide, yes, we'll associate that one with the vaccine, or no, we won't. Right? There is no systematic monitoring of adverse events after vaccines, and that is a tragedy, and that is why the public can't prove this correlation, but we're observing it in our children. So yes, we are swapping one disease for another, and it's time for the public to put the public's interest first in government policy, not pharmaceutical companies.
Thank you, Judy. Marelle, would you like to have some words?
Yeah, I'd just like to say a few words to that question too about autoimmune disease. Has it increased? My answer to that is, after 35 years experience as a practitioner in health, that the answer is yes. We have more ill people now than we did before. So something is happening, and we do see the autoimmune diseases appearing, and that is my first-hand frontline experience. And there is a book written by Schoenfeld, which is almost a textbook, and in there, with other immunologists, they've done a lot of research, of course not in Australia, and they link the aluminium hydroxide directly back to most of the autoimmune diseases, and aluminium is one of the adjuvants or additives in vaccines. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a question here in regards to fluoride. I thought fluoride is governed by the states, not the federal government. So how will you go about seeking changes within the states? Michael?
Pretty well all health initiatives are put out by the state, but it's the federal government that really champions the initiatives in the beginning. So yes, it is a state issue, but we will have some, we're hoping as we have representation, we'll have some power to be able to push these issues through to a forefront through health policies and be able to lobby for inquiries into the fluoridation. It's fascinating, you know, I think it's now 97% of all Europe does not fluoridate. I think now, what is it, the countries? It's only the UK, Ireland, Spain, Serbia and Poland. Poland's only 1%, and they'll soon be gone from there, and it's just getting less and less. Japan doesn't do it, and of course they have slashed their early childhood vaccination program with outstanding results. That's right. Just so with the fluoridation, yes, we are going to the election on a federal ticket, but we will have, if we can get in there, it'll be something we will agitate, because most policies flow down and not back, you know. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. My doctor was not even open to seeing anything about vaccine dangers. Why are doctors not giving informed consent, and why aren't more looking into this issue? Why are doctors not allowed to give medical exemptions for their patients that present with contraindications according to the manufacturer's guidelines? Oh, we all want to answer.
Oh, is it yours?
No.
They're scared. That's it. They're scared. There is no other logical reason. They know that to actually take that position, that their whole career is in jeopardy. Just ask Dr. Kevin Coleman, just ask Dr. John Peace, and just see what happens to a doctor who is currently working in the system that would start recommending to his patients to investigate vaccination and tell them the negative side effects. They would find themselves under the scrutiny in New South Wales by the HCCC, and it wouldn't be long before they would find themselves under a prohibition order. And if the Daily Telegraph or the Murdoch press ever got wind of it, they would find their picture all over the front pages as some sort of... And they would be photographed in the most unnice way, you know, maybe running to their garden like they did to John Peace, and that would be then they would just be smeared, and the public would just buy it. No doctor. Now, I just like to say this. We get a lot of doctors. I currently have a health retreat, and we get I often say it's disproportionately, what in the population, how many doctors per population, but we get a lot of doctors. We get a lot of medical people come there, and I'm fascinated that they choose to go outside of the treatment that they would give on other people, but when they're sick themselves or their family members are sick, they turn up on our door seeking help. And of course, we're happy for that. But I'm telling you, they're not going to put their career on the line and tell you what they may even believe for your benefit when it's over their career. Their career will come first, and unfortunately, that's how the most of them operate, unfortunately.
I'd just like to add a little bit to that question, and it relates to what Marelle mentioned earlier, which is with the contraindications to vaccines and the exemptions that you can get today. They're quite different to what was on the list prior to 1990, when they decided that they were going to add more vaccines to the schedule. Before 1990, as Marelle said, there were 5 or 6 contraindications to vaccines that included neurological damage, anaphylaxis and allergies, and things that are part of your family history and genetic makeup. They knew from observation that genetics plays the chemicals in vaccines play a role in predisposing people to these diseases. We've seen in children today, classrooms are full of pictures of children on the walls now with anaphylaxis. And life-threatening allergies. Parents are scared to go to birthday parties with kids for the sniff of peanut butter, or choking on, or reacting to the food that they're eating, one mouthful. It's life-threatening. They're life-threatening diseases, but parents are now have this risk, and often end up with children with long-term chronic illness, and they become lifetime carers for these kids. This is happening today. The reason in 1990, when they reduced the contraindications for vaccines, without a reason, a genetically diverse population, how can you just suddenly remove these contraindications? But this allowed them to add more vaccines to the schedule for a bigger market of people, and to actually give them in a school setting, not in your doctor's surgery. So here we have a medical intervention now being offered in schools without any informed consent procedures. Just sign this form, but no true information being given, and you have a wonderful market for vaccines. So this is what's been happening as they've expanded the vaccination schedule, and doctors, as we've said, they're regulated, and now they know that if they speak against the regulations, against the government's recommendations, they can lose their licence. Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. Can each candidate share what motivated them to give courage to stand for the Senate? So I'll go first. So I returned to Australia 2 years ago after spending a substantial amount of time overseas. I was a human rights activist in Indonesia, and I worked with social welfare programs. I came back to Australia and I was hit with the no jab, no pay policy, and it was just a totally different environment than I left. So I started looking into exactly what was going on, the discrimination, the coercion, the bullying towards parents. I saw firsthand through some of the pages that I manage, families being torn apart by policies, this culture of intolerance that was brewing in Australia. It was just so different than what I left. So when I came back, I started to get a little bit involved in WA, and I met some fantastic people there who motivated me to stand today, and especially Allona and Michael and Dr. Judy, and we've all been working together for a while, and I couldn't not stand. How could we let this go on in this country that we called a democracy? So I against my family's wishes, to be really honest. I am standing tall and I stand proud, and I'm happy to represent the people of WA, and I really hope that we get some seats in the Senate so we can create some change.
For me, I guess it goes back to my childhood. My parents, particularly my father, was always involved in standing up for rights, whether it be the environment, whether it be for people. And I don't like people suffering, and I don't like animals suffering, and I don't like our environment suffering. I don't like seeing the fish die. I don't like seeing animals that have got eczema and other diseases from over-vaccination. They haven't got a voice, and I particularly don't like seeing clients whose children have died and who are suffering and living every day with autism and have to be hypervigilant at watching them. So it's about people, and it's about freedom, and it's about a quality of life. Thank you.
So my story is I went in for a hepatitis B vaccine. I went in for a pap smear, ended up having a hepatitis B vaccine because I was supposedly at high risk of getting hepatitis B from the glasses from the pub that I worked in at the time. Had the series of 3, ended up covered in eczema, autoimmune issues and severe allergies. That went on for 7 years. I now have anaphylaxis to dairy, so I know anaphylaxis very well. When your throat closes up and you end up with hives and you're sitting in the bottom of your shower trying to breathe. So my heart goes out to all those children. We have an epidemic of anaphylaxis here in Australia, and that has to be addressed and it has to be stopped. As for standing for Senate, I think I've got rocks in my head, I'm not really sure. But I think for me, I looked around and went, oh my God, what are we going to do? Somebody has to do something. And to be honest, I don't know what to do anymore. Things are getting so bad, and the erosion of our rights and our choice, that I didn't know what to do. And so I'm standing right here, right now, because I had to do something, and because everyone has to do something, and I want to be that voice for the people. So that's why I'm here. So thank you.
Well, my journey started in the early 90s as a science teacher in schools, and it was when the principals were sitting around wondering what was causing all of this anaphylaxis and autism and allergies in our children and ADHD. And being a science teacher and having children at that time, I started having children at that time, so it occurred to me, well, perhaps I should investigate this issue at university. So I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I'd go to university and do the research and then be able to participate in proper academic debate on this topic, only to find that I have received a PhD that is denigrated by every journalist and activist without any health qualifications in this country, and to remove the credibility of a PhD that is in investigating a public health issue, the control of infectious diseases, but being described to the public as a humanities degree. And there are a number of ways in which the university participated in enabling it to be a humanities degree instead of continuing my research within the health faculty at Wollongong University. So there's a story there as well, but my children have observed how I've been treated by journalists in this country. I have been abused and denigrated in the media. I have the PhD, I thought I was doing the right thing, and yet journalists have actually have said that we are the people trying to do the wrong thing in society. We don't want to follow the rules. We have journalists in this country that have used those words, and they label us, they're allowed to be abusive to academics and professionals who speak up on this topic. That the official channels in this country, in Australia, are supporting the journalists in using abusive language, the anti-vaxxer label, the conspiracy theory label, allowing us to look like we're on the fringe, we're not mainstream. And my children have observed this, and it's a very difficult thing to actually try and give your children hope in the education system in this country, when I have achieved at the highest level really of the education system and been denigrated for doing so, and not being allowed to participate in open academic debate on this issue. So I'm hoping that people are watching what's happening. As for standing for Senator, I'm exactly the same as Allona. It is simply a case of what can we do, how can we get a platform for this topic, which is, it's a health issue. It shouldn't be presented in the media as a conspiracy theory, and that's what journalists want to do. You know, when they do a series on conspiracy theories, they want to add vaccines in there. This is a health issue, risks and benefits, and it is a political issue, because in fact the control of infectious diseases they were controlled through political and economic decisions, not a medical intervention. It wasn't vaccines. And that's the information that the government doesn't want people to hear. So it is through the persistence of Michael that I am very glad that I am today standing to try and help everybody to achieve choice in health issues and human rights. Thank you.
I had my oldest child vaccinated as a good Australian citizen and witnessed him to get very, very ill. But still weren't 100% convinced that it could have been coincidental. So at the time for the second one, back in the late 1980s, we had the second vaccination and he nearly died. He was so sick, and he was sick for a long time. And even today, I don't think he has a good respiratory. We never done that again. You know, it's like that. You know, you see, you just think, well, we won't do that again, okay? But when this no jab, no pay came into being, I thought to myself, really? Really? How could we do this? Like, I had a genuine bona fide experience of nearly losing my child, and now the people don't have a chance. And I thought, well, I'm old and grey, and I'd like to think that maybe if I was 25 again and having my children, that there's some old codger might just be fighting for my cause. And I thought, well, if not me, who will do it? And I thought about it for a while. I thought, well, let's start a political party. Let's do it. Let's take this up. Let's try and get into the big house. Let's try and, ruffle the feathers and, stir up put the cat amongst the pigeons. So that's my motivation. Thank you.
Thanks. Although not a candidate, Uncle Max would like to share some words.
You look at it is to the candidates, and it's also to you people. I thought that this was a democratic nation. I want you to think about that. That's not my word. That's the government's word, democratic. And they speak about it. They talk about it. And they're supposed to be so proud about it. But when it comes to democratic rights, of what you can refuse to have, we can't. You see, we suffered that. We suffered that. We never had our rights. Now you people are going through the same system. You see, where are your democratic rights? We lost ours when Cook first landed, and then Phillip landed down here. This is something. This is something. You have a right to vote. They say if you don't vote, you'll get fined. Eh? When they come from over there and come down here, it's upside down. And I think that they've stayed that way ever since. Confused and bewildered. Eh? You people, with your children, and whatever you're going to go through, you got a right to refuse. you women have a right to refuse. If a man makes advances on you, you have a right. Stick to it. Men have a right also not to be enlisted in the army. Stick to it. But when it comes to this intervention, again, notice the different little words coming in. You see, I never had any schooling, but I've started to pick up these words, intervention, what they mean, democratic, what it means, you know. Instead of being IMOP senators, you fellas should be democratic senators and put the word back in place, what it really means. Democratic rights, people, no vote for the jab. Thank you.
Australia has the highest rate of cancer. 1 in 2 will be diagnosed with cancer. Do vaccines contain retroviruses that can cause these cancers? Dr. Judy?
I mean, I'm not an expert on retroviruses, but I have seen research suggesting that there are retroviruses in vaccines. But we do know that the chemicals in vaccines can cause cancers, and we know that the pharmaceutical companies have not tested to see whether the vaccines are causing the cancers or not. And they haven't tested the reproductive systems to see what effects vaccines have on the reproductive systems. And that's the significance with the human papillomavirus vaccine, which is being promoted to both boys and girls now to prevent cervical cancer. That vaccine has now been linked to early menopause in young girls, so teenagers are getting menopause, that's increased in the population. And in the population in which that vaccine was tested, I think it was 11 to 26-year-old women, that was a demographic that rarely gets cervical cancer. Cervical cancer doesn't exist in young women. Cervical cancer is a disease that develops usually in women older than 40, 50, that age group. Well, now we have the incidence of cervical cancer increasing in women under 26 years of age, and before that was unheard of. So there's very good signs, and particularly childhood cancer. Childhood cancer is skyrocketing, and that also was a demographic. Cancers didn't exist in children. It was a very, very rare thing for a cancer in children around the 1900s. And so, yes, the correlation is there, and any correlation needs to be tested before you present it to the public as being safe for them to use. So we must start challenging these things now.
The experience that I've had is that most definitely your immune system is challenged from vaccines. They contain heavy metals, and those heavy metals are neurotoxic. And if your body is unable to eliminate those heavy metals quickly from the body, of course there's going to be immune compromising happening, immune challenges happening, and that predisposes you and switches on genes that would have otherwise not been switched on. So I liken it to that there are light switches in your house. They can be switched on, or you don't have to switch them on. And any challenge or assault to your immune system will consequently have impacts. There was a study done on a polio batch of vaccines that contained simian virus 40, and they followed that batch, and that was in the 1950s, and every one of those people actually got cancer. Thank you.
Okay, we've come to the end of the Q&A time, but I would just like to read out one last question, and that is, how can we help the IMOP team? So you can contact the IMOP head office in New South Wales. The WA branch also has a Facebook page where you can contact us directly, and of course Allona in Queensland with Adam. You can volunteer not only your time, because we do need volunteers to man the polling booths, hand out the how to vote cards. The other day at the AEC they gave me a book this thick in WA with all the polling booths listed on there. It's impossible to get somebody to every polling booth, of course, but if we could have some volunteers for polling day handing out the how to vote cards. Money donations, of course, we desperately need to continue the fight, to do flyers, billboards. We have a banner campaign going on in WA that's proving quite successful to raise awareness for IMOP. So there's many different ways that you can help and volunteer. So if you can contact IMOP, we collect all your information, and then somebody would be in contact with how you can actually help practically. So thank you today to the panel for the Q&A. And that, thank you.